Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Price and Value Journey. I'm your host, John Ray. And today we're going to talk about an aspect of leadership that maybe we somewhat ignore. Those of you that are solo and small firm professional services providers, even if you're in a large firm, you know the demands that meet you every day in terms of assisting clients, expanding your business. And this is true whether you're a consultant, coach, attorney, CPA, whatever your practice area is. That's the one thing we all have in common. And the question is maybe not necessarily how you manage others often as it is how you learn to lead yourself. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's edition of the Price and Value Journey. And we're going to talk with Kate McCombs. Kate is an assistant professor of management at Samford University in Birmingham, and she's a rising voice in the field of leadership development. Kate specializes in self-leadership. It's the research-backed practice of influencing your own thoughts, behaviors, and motivations to reach your goals. And in addition to her work teaching at Samford, Kate also has her own consulting practice, RH Leadership, from which she works with emerging leaders. She also conducts leadership workshops, mostly for businesses. Kate, welcome to the Price and Value Journey.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me on here. And I'm excited to talk to you and excited to talk to everyone here.
Yeah, great to have you here. And I'm shouting out Randy Hain for putting the two of us together. So let's shout out Randy, our good friend.
Yes, I will add a double shout out. Randy Hain has been so influential to me, and I know probably you as well, pretty much anyone that has met him. So really happy he put us in touch.
Yeah, I'm delighted. So thank you, Randy. So let's give a little more background on you, Kate, what I missed, and particularly what led you into this particular field of study, self-leadership.
Yeah, happy to. So I graduated from the University of Florida with my undergrad actually in finance. So go Gators, for any Gators out there. And also with my master's. And so I went to work in finance. My goal was to work the corporate ladder, continue through every little step until I got to the top. And I worked with Siemens Healthcare for a number of years. I had the privilege of working with I was in a leadership development program. So I was able to work with over 10 leaders in a really short span. Then ended up working in sales at a startup in Nashville. Realized finance was maybe more introverted than I was. So let me try something different. And just kept getting pulled back to school. Kept getting pulled back to wanting to learn more and more about what made me motivated and what didn't. During that time, had some leaders I really respected and a lot of leaders that made me want to run from corporate America. And I think we've all had those experiences too. So I went back to school to really study that. What makes people want to follow someone? What makes people enjoy their life, which is such a high percentage work. So went back to school to study management, specifically leadership, with a focus on organizational behaviors. So what makes people do what they do in work? What makes people want to do certain things and not do certain things? Been teaching now at Samford University for going on 5 years and absolutely love working with the students, but now been pulled more recently to go back and work with some of the organizations as well and bridge the research with the practice and theory. Because all of this stuff, it isn't necessarily hard, but it takes a lot to figure out. Love learning, love challenging myself, and love just sharing anything I learn with everyone else.
That's terrific. Now let's talk specifically about self-leadership. Your work centers on self-leadership. I think that's probably a term that when I first heard it, any of our listeners that are listening to this, they hear that term and think, I know exactly what that is, but maybe we don't. So tell, in your own words, explain the concept of self-leadership.
Yeah. So first of all, leadership to me, and I think most people that are listening to your podcast as I've listened to it, is leadership is very people centric. Leadership is focused on people. People are what's at the heart of success. Too often with leadership training, though, we jump to how can we influence other people? How can we lead other people? When self-leadership is all about starting with how do you lead yourself? How do you foster your own engagement, your own leadership, your own empowerment? And what I've really absolutely loved about this concept of self-leadership and why I'm so focused on it for all my students and for any business leader out there is if you can understand yourself and lead yourself, then you can understand other people and lead other people. Leadership is incredibly complex because there is not one way to do it. And my finance background found that so incredibly frustrating when I was first studying leadership is I did not end my 5 years of studying with this is how to be a good leader. And that is incredibly aggravating, right? But there is a good way to lead yourself. And if you can do that well, then you're at that first step to actually be able to lead other people. So self-leadership is all of these strategies, habits, strategies, mental practices in order to be a stronger self-leader. And then I truly believe other people will want to follow your leadership too.
So one thing and maybe this goes hand in hand with defining self-leadership, but one of the things that you've said about this idea is that it is not a personality trait. It's more of a skill set. So why is that such an important concept to understand?
Yes. So sometimes when we think of leaders, we think, okay, when you're 5 years old on the playground, who stands out as that leader? And it's such a positive thing, right? That's just not the case. Sometimes leaders are the loudest. Sometimes the best leader is someone that's a little bit quieter. And again, that takes knowing yourself. That takes someone that is a self-leader. What's so fantastic about this is self-leadership is not a personality trait. It's a skill set. It's something that you can learn, you can train in. It's a muscle that you can gain by doing certain strategies every single day. What's hard about that is it's not necessarily hard, but it takes a consistency that can be really exhausting. So it's the best part of it is that it's a skill you can learn. It's the hardest part of it because that means you got to do it every day for the rest of your life.
Right.
Want to be a strong self-leader, which can be intimidating to hear, right?
Yeah, I was about to say the easiest thing is that you can work on it every day. The hardest thing is you have to work on it every day. Those are two sides of the same coin. So there's a consistency element to this. How do I know what skills I need to work on?
Yeah, so really how it starts is understanding yourself. So that's where I always focus with any client, any student I have is figuring out where you're at first, then figuring out what do you want. And those are not simple questions. Figuring out what you value, what you truly want, what success looks like, figuring out what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like, what you don't like. Those are not easy questions and take a lot of time, a lot of intentionality. From there, then you can implement certain strategies. So a lot of people know self-goal setting. Every New Year's Eve, people set a goal. By February 2nd, I think there's 2 people still doing their goals. So that is one of the strategies, but a strategy I like focusing on is self-observation. So actually reflecting, actually checking in on what went well, what didn't go well. Another strategy I really like focusing on is mental constructive thought strategies. So how are you thinking about things? How do you handle a setback? How are you thinking about yourself? How do you handle criticism? And all of these things just take a lot of intentionality to figure out, but there's actionable steps you can take to figure it out, to work on it, and then do it. And that's what I'm able to do with any of my clients.
I want to talk a little bit more about skills here in just a second, but I want to address those solopreneurs or near solopreneurs, those that really don't have what partners or peers in their business, and or maybe they don't have full-time employees, but in any case, they're thinking about whether they want to listen to the rest of this podcast because they think this doesn't apply to me. And let's talk about how the concept of self-leadership applies to a solopreneur.
Oh, sure does. So self-leadership, I think where it really stuck with me and where it really resonated with me, I've been studying for a number of years, but is when I became a mom. So I have 2 kids. I have one just turned 2, and then we're also fostering, and she's about 10 months old. So 2 under 2, a lot going on in my house, and very quickly realized if I'm not leading myself, everything crumbles. And by everything, I don't have employees, the dishwasher, I mean, my own life, my own sanity,
Right.
my productivity, what I'm doing in the classroom, it all goes away. If you cannot lead yourself well, it's even more important if you are on your own as an entrepreneur. Because sometimes we jump to leading other people. That makes us feel good about ourselves. That makes us feel like we're being a mentor. Oh, yes, great. And we're not leading ourselves, the ship keeps going. But if you're not leading yourself and it's a one-man ship or a one-woman ship, that ship's going to sink. That's not going to work out. So it's even more important. And I think I really realized that once I was a mom, when I don't have employees, I just have, and I'm not leading them. They don't listen to what I say necessarily.
Right.
They aren't babies, they're just there. These things on the ship that you're just, and anything you do changes everything that's happening. So that's really when it resonated with me of, wow, there needs to be these practices instilled in you every single day, these strategies every single day, this consistency every single day. Because especially when you don't have the rest of a team, it becomes even more apparent if you're not leading yourself well.
Wow. How do you think that shows up?
Not leading yourself well, or leading yourself
well?
Well?
If you're a mom and you show up with your pants inside out, there are all sorts of different ways it shows up. If you're a mom or a dad, that hopefully our dads are involved like that. But no, I'm talking about as a solopreneur in your business. How does that show up and maybe you'd want to widen it past that size of a business into a larger business, but how does the lack of self-leadership show up to the rest of the world? What does that look like?
Yeah. It either is going to lead to unsuccessful organization. So one that's not going to work out because you don't have the habits in place to make it successful. Or, which sometimes is even harder to watch, a successful organization, but an incredibly unhappy person. And in that sense, what is success? If you are incredibly unhappy, incredibly burned out, but your organization is monetarily making revenue and doing well, that's sometimes the harder one to pull someone out of because they don't even realize their self-leadership is leading to success in that it's leading to revenue for the organization, but is that sustainable? Are they going to completely burn out? What are they teaching other people? What are they giving back to the whole world? What are they showing as a role model to what success looks like? So I think it can be one of the two. I think if you see it lead to your company failing, that's the more obvious. You're not leading yourself well. That's the more obvious. But I think it can also, I think we see it every day in some of these leaders we aspire to be because they're so successful, i.e. they have such a high revenue, but they're not leading themselves well. They're not taking care of themselves. They're not sustainable. They're not being strong role models for others. And we see that in a lack of engagement in the generation coming into work. We see they're seeing, if that's what success is, do I even want that? Do I want to be that? So I think that is actually a harder group to really get seeing how important self-leadership is because they might say, I'm incredibly successful. But how do you measure that? What does that really mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, you talked about your career journey. You talked about having leaders in your orbit that you were delighted to follow and be mentored by. You also talked about the exact opposite, those leaders that you wanted to separate from as soon as you could. I'm just curious if there were a particular incident, a moment where that what came out of that was you realizing the critical importance that self-leadership has for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really it's the amount of leaders that you realize did not know themselves, and did not know the values they stood behind. Because if you do not have strong values and know those values, then you end up being wonky in every single decision, because you're making your decisions based off of maybe revenue, maybe just your feelings in the moment, that emotion in the moment. And one example I had is one of the last roles I left, it was a complete lack of trust, because they were valuing the organization and valuing the organization's profits over our own relationship. And so when I was starting to talk about my career goals, and one of those career goals was be a professor at some point, instead of seeing that as the team, I was the highest performer, I was leading the team. And instead of seeing that as a positive, like I'm sharing with you my career goals, it was twisted in a way of, oh my gosh, this person's going to leave. That's not going to be good for me. So that person's success version was all based on, and their version of being a good leader was all based on that one business, that one area being successful. Instead of seeing, if this person continues to grow, that's me being a successful leader. If this person continues to flourish, that's me being a successful leader. And what ended up happening is, because of the reaction I got, it really made me see this leader completely differently. I don't even use the word leader. It made me see my manager, my CEO, completely differently, because I wanted to then speed up. Instead of saying, I'm going to go get my PhD in 5 years, so I'm going to start looking now, because you aren't supporting what I'm hoping to do. You aren't supporting and seeing that this was me being honest with you and seeing you as a mentor. Instead, you were so focused on what this means just for me. And I don't know if that was completely clear, but I think, again, it just keeps coming back to figuring out your own definition of success, and then making sure anyone you go to work for, that matches. And for me, success is people that I'm leading flourishing. And that means they go home better people to their family. They go home not snapping at their kids or their husband or their wife, because they thrived in their day, and now they go home and they thrive at home too. And that can really make a much more sustainable work culture.
It seems like to me this is, at this point in 2025, we should be at a point where leaders realize that it's self-evident that if those that are in your charge, in your care, and I say those words deliberately, if they are seen and valued and their dignity is respected, and you're going to get a lot more of all the things that you want as a company out of that group, more productivity or efficiency or whatever you want to call it, whatever terms you're looking for, revenue, you're going to get more out of that group.
Yeah, I
don't understand why we're still talking about this.
I know. It's crazy, because my whole 5 years of just deep studying, I could rattle off all of this research that shows it. Not only do we see it in personal lives, we see it in the research, we see it everywhere. Unfortunately, it's because we have this tension between, okay, we know that's the case, but then we want short-term profits. And then what does success look like? And we see Uber, we see Amazon. It's, oh, wow, they're so successful. They're making so much money. And then there's lawsuit after lawsuit, and company culture shifts. And we see there's these deeper cracks that people seem to be ignoring a little bit because of the high success. And so then what does it take? We're teaching, sure, we're saying one thing. What gets short-term success? Burning employees out, getting the most we can from them, having short-term strategies. And so we see that leads to success, or some people's versions of success. And that then leads, it's not a sustainable long-term approach. So we really need to believe and be intentional behind what are we trying to achieve as a business. And sometimes that might mean your decision you make, and I'm sure a lot of listeners listening to this have faced this, a decision you make may lead to not as high of a profit or not as high of a revenue, but a stronger, sustainable business that's actually doing what they wanted their business to do.
Folks, we're chatting with Kate McCombs. Kate is an assistant professor of management at Samford University in Birmingham, focusing on leadership development. She's also the head of her own consulting practice, RH Leadership, where she works with leaders and emerging leaders. Kate, let's talk a little bit about, since we're on this subject, this word engagement, which has been used so many times. I'm not sure what it means anymore. Maybe you can help with that. But what do you think about the role of self-leadership with engagement? First of all, how would you define engagement? And what role does self-leadership have in fostering more engagement?
Yeah, so I feel like burnout, engagement, these have become buzzwords that we've said it so often. We've completely lost the meaning of it. But having engaged employees, very simply, are people that want to be there, people that are motivated and people that want to be there. And it doesn't mean they want to be there until midnight, but they want to be there. They're focused, they're intentional, they're driven, and then they go home and then they come back again. So that's what we want with an engaged employee. Unfortunately, Gallup just had a study that came out that only 31% of people are engaged in their role. That's a lot of people that aren't. And what that leads to is people calling out sick, people on autopilot, people saying they're working, but they're really doing XYZ or shopping, or they're doing work at such a slow pace because it's painful to do. And we've all done some of that work, right? It takes us 10 times the amount it should because we're just not enjoying it. So that's why we want engaged employees. Now, ideally, you have a culture, you have a leader, you have a company that instills this engagement, that instills this motivation. You have companies that hire leader development coaches and leader development people to come in and help with that engagement. But that's often not the case. So if you're a self-leader, it doesn't matter what else is happening. You still have your strategies. So self-leadership is this compass, and the waves are real. A lot of things come up, but you still have this compass that kind of can help you navigate through the storm, no matter what organization you're in, no matter what your leader's doing, your manager's doing. You still have, these are my strategies to stay engaged, to stay motivated, to stay enjoying my day-to-day, completely independent of the environment or what else is happening.
You talk about that the fix for disengagement is personal agency. So what do you mean by that? And why is that such an important idea?
Yeah, so it's interesting because nothing can make someone feel they matter. So we spend a lot of money, organizations spend a lot of money on developing leaders. Nothing can truly make you feel like you matter, you want to develop, you want to grow, except yourself. So that's why it's so difficult to sometimes have these programmings, because you just can't force it. I have students all the time that I'm so passionate about what I'm talking about, and you just can't force it sometimes. So people having this personal agency, people wanting to be a self-leader is really that first starting point. Now, programs can help make people feel ready for that, make people feel motivated for that, make people feel the sense of belonging that sometimes they need in order to go that direction. So it helps support, and leadership helps support people to become these stronger self-leaders, but you can't force it, which is why just, oh, we have LinkedIn Learning now. Oh, we have this. We have so many sources online that it's not really going to do anything unless someone is already wanting to do that. And that's why we need these relational coaches. It's why we need these relational workshops. It's why I have some classes online and some classes in person, and I love my in-person ones because you need that component to really help people get that personal agency.
Yeah, and I was just looking in my notes, it's somewhere along the way you talked about the importance of intention. And that's really what you're talking about here, right?
Yeah, this importance of being intentional. And again, it comes back to that's not a hard thing. That's not complex, but it takes consistency. Imagine being intentional about everything you say and do every single moment. That's exhausting.
Right.
That's pretty darn draining. So intentionality is really difficult, but I think is the secret sauce to being successful and having that personal agency, being a strong self-leader, influencing other people, having that intentionality with what you do. And a lot of times, talked about it in one post that you and I conversed on, is having a pause, having those 5 seconds that you pause so you can catch yourself up and actually be intentional. And man, I'm good at that at work. In my personal life, not so much. Something comes over me and I'm not good at the pause. The pause is so difficult. So it's practicing it in every single aspect of your life so you can be more intentional, be more present, and actually it can be really empowering, right? You're the one making these decisions. You're the one doing it and putting that ownership on you.
And we have to say, though, there are some points in time where you cannot pause. Like to use a parenting example, when the child's getting ready to touch the burner, you cannot pause. So you've got to stop that. And we see that in the workplace too. We see the equivalent of that where the reaction maybe is more important than the intention, but you still got to remain with intention. And I'm just curious how you do that in those circumstances.
I would push back and say you can always pause. You can always have a 5-second pause, because if your reaction is too extreme, if your reaction is rub someone the wrong way, it doesn't matter the intention behind it. They're not hearing any of it. Now, if it's safety, totally separate. Like your example with toddler on the oven, that is a time you scream, you yell. Right. Same with if an employee is about to tumble down the stairs. Scream and yell. There's no 5-second pause there when it comes to safety. But really, besides safety, someone getting injured, what is there that's so important that you can't pause for 5 seconds? Because you can argue all day long about, that's not the way I meant it. This is the way I meant it. You need to understand the way I meant it. But all people hear is the way you react, what you're saying, how you say it. So if you don't have that intention behind it of how do I want to come across, the rest doesn't matter. It maybe matters to you, and maybe matters in the argument of who was right, but it doesn't matter in the final outcome. So if you are a business owner and you have a good relationship with someone in your supply chain and then they're late one day and you just go off on them, that might burn the relationship forever. And even though you say I was in the right to do that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So you really have to figure out, what is my intention? What's my goal here? And then match what you say to that goal.
There are a lot of professionals who listen to this show who, maybe every single one of them, maybe that's what we've all got in common, right? That we are wired for productivity, we're wired for efficiency, we're wired for achievement, getting things done. What's the danger in speed?
I love this question because, yes, you're right. Like, we are already self-selecting in this podcast, people that are already probably at a level of self-leadership that they just need these strategies to keep doing it. They just need to not just keep doing it the rest of their life. But it's also people that like being efficient, people that like speed. And I think of AI a lot with this. ChatGPT, I use it all the time. I think people should learn it, use it, love it. I love it. it is making me so efficient. But you constantly have to balance that out with, are you being effective? And the study of leadership really helps me with that, because leadership is not efficient. Teaching leadership is not efficient. There's not, here is how to be a leader, go do it. It is incredibly inefficient. It takes reflection, it takes observation, it takes understanding this person and this person. But you're effective if you take the time to do those things. So it's frustrating because it's not efficient, but to be effective, you have to sit in that frustration. Same thing with this speed. Sometimes AI, it's just efficient and it's effective. But you constantly have to question and test yourself. Am I just being efficient, or is this also effective? We see a lot of people don't like meetings. That's great. Less meetings, I'm all for that. If it can be an email, have it be an email. But at what point are we being too efficient that we're losing out on that relationship building, and then we're no longer effective? So just constantly making sure we're balancing those two things and making sure that they're aligned. You can also be too focused on relationship building or spending too much time, or people that are really resistant to AI, I see. No, there's a place for being really efficient too.
Mhm.
So just constantly battling these two things is really, for me, really fun to figure out, and really exciting to figure out, how do you balance these two things and not let efficiency and convenience take over.
You said earlier that that self-leadership is really a skills-based muscle that we have to develop. So where do the skills come in when we're talking about this particular issue?
So with this, it takes setting your own goals, observing your own goals, setting your own values, actually tracking what your actions are and are they matching these values, constructive thought strategies. How are you making excuses, or is this really what you want to stand behind? For example, this summer, this is something I'm really working on, is my relationship with technology and how much I want to have it, how much I don't. When should I push myself to put the phone away? And when should I have it there right in front of me? And being really clear with how I want to show up, being really clear with what I think is okay or not okay. So if this is okay to me, I'm on a podcast and I have my phone and I'm texting, then go for it. If that's okay with you, go for it. I have friends that at dinner, they'll be texting. It does not bother me. I'm fine with it. I don't want to show up that way anymore. So that takes me setting a goal. And then that takes me observing, am I doing it? And then that takes me figuring out, why am I not doing it? Well, it's because I'm bored. Okay, let's figure out how to be bored. Let's figure out how to sit and be a little bored with something without grabbing this and checking whatever email that isn't even important, right? So it's all going to be dependent on that person. But really, it's just a check and balances for yourself. And being a self-leader is all these strategies to constantly keep yourself in check, so you're constantly growing and showing up the way you want to show up. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense, but I'm still stuck on a particular point, and that is how we assess that ourselves. And it strikes me that your example of what others see in us that we don't see ourselves is a great one, because that's part of the problem, right? Is when I look at myself, I'm sure that's not true for everyone, but I look at myself through rose-colored glasses, right? Oh, and I apologize for myself profusely and excuse myself. If we're honest, that's what we do, right? So it strikes me that you've really got to have an objective third party, and that's a problem if you're a solopreneur, by the way, or if you're the strong leader of a small firm where you don't have maybe a peer that you can trust to tell you what you don't want to hear. And that's something that we have to have as owners of our businesses, someone that's a third party that can look at these things and look at us in the way we don't look at ourselves.
Yes. And I would say some people have rose-colored glasses Some people have, I don't know what the opposite of rose colored, dark colored glasses. Everything they see is in a negative light of themselves. There's both sides of that. So yes, having that third party and being a person that's always asking for feedback, having people around you that challenge you, right? Having people around you that don't let you settle, that challenge you and say, hey, you could be better here. This was one advice that actually Randy Hain gave me, of asking for feedback instead of saying, do you have any feedback for me? Saying, what's one thing I could have done better? What's one way I could have improved? And that lets people relax and actually allows them to give you feedback. And that's been something that's been really helpful for me. It's also where executive coaches come in. It's where leadership programs come in. It's where leadership development consulting, shameless plug there, comes in, is this third party to come and help. Because sometimes maybe it's a leader that says this person is not very self-aware. They're not realizing what they need to grow in. And a third party can come in and help them see where they need to grow and then help them focus in on how to grow in that area, whether it be communication, whether it be conflict style, whether it be the way they're interacting with people, whether it be motivating themselves, whatever it may be. A third party can really help open someone's eyes to that too, if they don't already have that group of people around them that's challenging them and is receptive to that challenge.
Let's talk about overwhelm for just a second. You've talked about that. You've shared about your own background in that department where you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions, and talk about how you counsel others to lead themselves through overwhelm.
Yeah. Who hasn't felt overwhelmed? And I'm sure people that are listening to this are probably listening to this while they're on a walk, while they're answering emails, while they're doing 1,000 things. Like
Right.
We are in a state of constant overwhelm. And really, I come back to this word intentionality. Get yourself off autopilot. Focus on one thing. Get back to the bare minimum. What are 3 things I need to get done today? What is one thing I could intentionally do today? And focus on that. Zero it back in. Because if we try to do 10 things, we do 10 things badly. When we're in a state of overwhelm, we're in a state of panic, we end up doing everything pretty poorly. So figuring out, zeroing in, what can I be intentional about? What can be the thing that I really focus on here? That's where I start. And you think when you're overwhelmed that I need to do it all, when the answer is just doing one thing. And then seeing, do you want to do something else after that? Just starting with one thing and being really clear and focused on that.
Yeah, that's energizing for the people in the organization too, right? Because when you're narrowed on what you need to focus on, then you naturally lead that way, it seems to me. And that focus helps those that are part of your team.
Yes. If things are too vague and things are too, okay, we have all these things to do, people don't even know where to start. And that's very unmotivating. That's really leads to that lack of engagement. That leads to people feeling a little bit at a loss. And some people that are self-leaders are going to be proactive when they feel at a loss, but a lot of people won't. A lot of people will sit back quietly and wait until they feel like they know what they're supposed to do next. So if you can help be very clear with yourself and with others about what the goal is, then you can get at least everyone on the same path and have that clarity.
What are some practical tips or ideas that you have in terms of setting those short-term, 1 or 2 week at a time, intention-focused goals? What are some practical ideas you have about that? Why does that matter more than a to-do list?
Yeah. To-do lists are great. Whenever I'm anxious or nervous, I make another to-do list, right? They leave us feeling good. But having intention-focused goals is really where you're going to see forward movement. You're going to see that to-do list get shorter and shorter because you have that intention on it. I love also having a 5-year plan. So if you start with a 5-year plan, where do I see myself in 5 years? Then work backwards. What is that person doing week by week? What is that person's habits like? From there, set those goals and make it just one a month, one thing that you want to have intention on this month. By the end of the year, you'll have 12 things that you now are more intentional about. And really zeroing in on one thing a month that you want to be more focused on. And I'll say one specific strategy, even though there's so many, just so there's one strong takeaway, is self-observation. So if you can say, I want to work on this one thing this month, every morning and every night, did I do this thing? Did I do it well? Did I not do it well? And check in. Benjamin Franklin had a little book, and he had 10 virtues, I think 10 or 13 virtues. And every day he checked off if he did them or not. And some days he was like, I spoke too much. Gonna put a little black mark in my book. He checked that every single day. And he didn't necessarily do things perfectly, right? But by doing this, he has a great quote about doing this, he got one step closer to being that person he wanted to be. So I think that self-observation is just key, and actually track it. Track, okay, I want to be on my phone. I don't want to be on my phone after 5 p.m. every day. Every day, did I do this well? Did I not? Why didn't I do it? Track it every single day for a month and only focus on that, and then see how that feels. See how it went. And then reach out to me for another strategy because I've got 100. But that's a really good, tangible, direct one to do that can change so much. You can end 2026 with 12 new things that are making you a stronger leader in person.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that was 13 traits on the list. So you could theoretically, if you keep up with it, it won't be theoretical. You will get to each of those items on the list 4 times in a year.
Yep.
So that makes a lot of sense. I want to shift gears here because I'd be remiss in not bringing up our emerging leaders who are operating in a environment of chaos, uncertainty, and that's really the default of history. I think we that grew up in earlier years have been spoiled in terms of relatively a chaos-free existence for most of that time. What we thought was chaos wasn't that at all now that we see what is going on today. So I guess the question is, what's your advice to emerging leaders at this point that are coming into leadership roles in this kind of environment with team members that have this hanging over their heads, this environment hanging over their heads? And what does that look like for you, and how do you counsel those individuals?
Yeah, it's really why I'm so passionate about teaching self-leadership. Lead yourself first. Don't wait to be discovered. Get clear on what matters and then move. So even if it's messy, get clear on what matters, clear on what you want on your 5-year plan, and then move. Go for it. And don't wait for someone to tell you to go for it, because right now people are dealing with a lot and they might not have the capacity to give you this plan, to give you this career plan and this path and do this year, this next year. You've got to do that on your own. So get clear on it and then go do it. And I see a lot of students, a lot of emerging leaders are doing just that. And then there's also a lot that are waiting for direction. And right now, that's not the time to wait for direction, because leaders, high up management executives are dealing with a lot going on that they maybe don't have the capacity to give that direction.
And they may be judging what you're doing. They may be judging their future leaders based on their self-initiative when it comes to that kind of thing, right?
Definitely. They're waiting to see, what are you doing? I think too often middle management or early on career will look and see, okay, what is this manager is my leader. I'll do what they tell me to do. Instead of, your role is to help that manager. So how can you help? Starting there, how can you help them? How can you help them? What are your goals? How can you move? How can you move forward? And being really proactive, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it's awkward, even if it means picking up the phone and making a phone call, doing those steps forward, just having that motion forward.
Kate, let's maybe as we come to a close, maybe we can give a few more ideas or practices that we can start today, we can start this week, that would help us be better self-leaders.
Yeah. Get clear on your values. So there's a ton out there on how to figure out what your top values are, 3 to 5, no more than that. Get clear on your values. That even matters for what this podcast talks about too, is understanding your value, understanding what your values are so you can price yourself better, so you can market to other people. So understanding, what does success mean to you? That ties to your values. What does leadership mean to you? That ties to your values. What do you want with this business? That ties with your values. So it's a skip that but it's something we know is important, but it's often a step that's skipped. Or we think we know our values, but then when we sit down and we look at the list of all these great things, we're like, how am I supposed to pick 3 of them? Get very clear of what are your top values. So then you can make your decisions, make your goals, make your pricing, make everything tied to that.
That got my attention when you started talking about how all this relates to pricing. That got my attention, and I'm sure it did for those that are regular listeners of this podcast. Thank you for making that valuable connection. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here and for your great work. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I've learned a lot, and I know our listeners have.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Before we let you go, though, let's give contact information, coordinates where folks can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Kate McCombs, put a lot of content out there as well as blog posts on my website. If you're interested in any of the leadership development programs, you can go to my website, rhleadership.com, or email me, kate.mccombs@rhleadership.com.
Terrific. Kate McCombs. Kate is RH Leadership is her consulting practice, and she's also professor of management at Samford University. Keep up the great work you're doing, Kate. We look forward to staying in touch with what you're doing because you've got a lot going on.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, folks, thank you for joining us on the Price and Value Journey. If you found this episode helpful, and I can't believe you didn't, but if you found it helpful, share it. Share it with those that you think need to hear some of these ideas and concepts that Kate had to share with us today. And if you are not a subscriber, wherever you're listening to this show, go subscribe. We'd be delighted to have you as a regular listener. If you work as a consultant, coach, accountant, in any service-related field, and you have trouble understanding one key concept, and that concept is your clients see more value in you than you see yourself. If that is a mystery to you on how that works, I've written a book just about that, because once you understand that concept, it changes everything about your practice, how you position yourself, and ultimately price your services. The book is called The Generosity Mindset, A Journey to Business Success by Raising Your Confidence, Value, and Prices. It's available where all books are sold, either online or at your favorite local bookstore. You can order it there. You can also go to thegenerositymindset.com to learn more about the book and for links on where to get the book. If you decide to buy it, let me know what you think. Love to hear from you. And speaking of that, the way to be in touch with me is john@johnray.co, JOHNRAY.co, john@johnray.co. And if you'd like to give us feedback on the show, we'd love to hear that as well. So thank you for your attention and support. We're grateful. On behalf of Kate McCombs, I'm John Ray. Join us next time on the Price and Value Journey.